Hello readers, I'm Amy and today I want to do another font video. It's been a little bit since I've brought the font nerdery onto my channel. If you don't know already, I love fonts, texts, the designs of it, and I want to talk about it in relation to books. So a little bit of background, I am currently working on my bachelor's in graphic design and media arts. I took a font class over the summer and I loved it so much, finding out what fonts work together, how fonts show personality, and today I want to talk about that personality as it pertains to books. One thing to note, I took my glasses off so I don't have as much light from my ring light being reflected in my glasses, so hopefully I can give you like a decent idea of what fonts are in the books that I'm going to be showing you, but like if I hold it up to the screen or to the camera, I can't just look in the viewfinder and see if it's focusing because I don't have my glasses on. But regardless, I want to talk about fonts and how they can depict characters in books, if that makes sense, which if it doesn't make sense now, it'll make sense in a minute. A quick kind of content warning, I guess. I am going to be discussing Harry Potter in this video. I'm going to be showing off the font in one of the books that I have. I don't have the regular books, I just have some of the illustrated copies that I've gotten over the years. And the illustrated copies have different fonts than the regular books, which will actually really help in this discussion. But nevertheless, I am going to be talking about Harry Potter because it is the best example that I can find across any literature for examples of fonts and how it shows who someone is. So if you don't want to hear about Harry Potter, then I guess click off of this video. But I'm not telling you to read the books, I'm not showing off a collection, I'm not talking about the author, I'm specifically talking about the fonts that were chosen for the books, which was a design decision. So, font. What do we know about font? Well, if you're like me, you know a lot about font. If you're not like me, maybe you're like, well, what's the big deal? Font in a title, like you're determining the color and the shape. Let's look at what white people can do next. You have this very thick sans serif font. Sans serif means it doesn't have the tiny little lines at the edges of all the letters. It's just this bold, thick, plain lined font. It has a message to say, it's going for it, it's kind of yelling at you, it's in all caps. This is a very bold, in your face, I have something to say font, and that really sells the idea of this book, which is what white people can do next. Racism is an extremely important topic, and this font choice, this thick, black, non-fancy font, really just puts it out there and yells in your face, I am important, I have something important to say, this is a serious topic. Then, if we look at something like Mostly Dead Things, we have this kind of, it almost looks like a thick Sharpie written font. It's kind of fun, it's a little different. The topic, Mostly Dead Things, is pretty morbid, but you can tell from these slanted lines and the lack of right angles that it's not taking itself too seriously. Like, this is a fiction book. We're not here for super serious topics necessarily, we're just here to tell a story. That can really tell you a lot about a book. You can tell just from the way the titles are written out. Even if you had no imagery on here, you could tell there was a huge difference in the subjects of these two books. These are not the same book, they're not telling you the same story. And something that I find really interesting when it comes to writing books is that most books, like 99% of books, don't play with font all that much. Trying to find a good example here. So, I mean, there's lots of good examples. I just picked the book that was next to me on my closest shelf. Let's look at these two pages in Magic Lessons. You see this font? This is a serif font because it has these tiny little, like, fancy extra bits at the ends of all the letters. Serif font is pretty standard as far as pages in books go. There is a debate as to whether serif or sans serif is easier to read. That's going to be an ongoing debate for a while, but Times New Roman is what you need to write all of your school papers in. Generally, Times New Roman, font size 12, generally double-spaced. You don't really get a lot of double-spaced fiction, but the serif fonts are typically what is used for professional papers like that, and it's typically what you find in books. Now, if you look through the pages of this book, like even just comparing these two pages, this is pretty standard. The font on each of these pages is identical. It doesn't matter who's speaking, it doesn't matter like which chapter we're on, they're all going to have the same font. The difference is going to be in italics and bold. So if you've used Microsoft Word at all, if you've done any basic typing, you know about italics and bold. Here in this section of the book, you've got your standard font, and then this section right here is emphasized, and you can tell that you're supposed to pay some sort of special attention, or that it's some special part of the story because it's in a different style of font. Generally, italics is used for letters or poems or songs whenever you are reading a fiction book. That is how you determine that this section of the book, this poem, this song, isn't quite like the rest of the book. It's not just a part of the story, it's a poem is an object within the story, and we're going to change the font so that you know that. If we see bold in books, which we don't really see a lot of it, it's generally going to be in titles rather than within the print itself. That is pretty standard for books as far as books go. One particular author that I want to bring up when talking about different fonts is Jodi Picoult. Some people say Picoult. I looked it up on the website. It is Pico, like P-I-C-O. All of these extra letters are just fanciness. Regardless, that's besides the point. This is a copy of My Sister's Keeper. I read it in high school. I've had this book ever since. Holds a special place in my heart. Inspired me, actually, to do a presentation on, was it IVF or was it was like designer babies or something that I did in high school. I was into this stuff even in high school. Anyways, getting off track of the point. Jodi Picoult was the first author that I saw do something really different besides J.K. Rowling whenever it comes to font. So it might be a little tricky to see in the camera, but this is one of the chapters. Jodi Picoult's books, her chapters separate by characters. So look really closely at some of the details in this font, maybe how that W is shaped or how that K is shaped. And then we are going to switch to the very next page, which starts a new chapter. Now, not only did they change the style of font, we can see some of the letters are different, but you'll notice that the space between each line on the page looks a little different because the sizing on the font is a little different. So this first page that I showed you looks like a pretty standard, like Times New Roman-ish type font. But the second font is a little thicker, it's a little bolder. It's still a serif, so there's not huge stylistic differences, but it's almost, because of the thickness, it's almost a little more squared off. You can tell, basically what I'm saying, is that with Jodi Picoult having a different character per chapter, you can tell just by changing the page to the next chapter that we are getting a completely different character's perspective. And you don't even need the chapter title, which is a character name, to tell the difference between the chapters. You just flip the page and you can see there's something different, and that is going to be the font. The font in Jodi Picoult's books changes according to which character is in charge of the chapter. This is a good one. So we have on this page, this is the end of a chapter and this is the beginning of the chapter. If you look at the font on each page, it's changed. This is a little thicker. This is a serif. This is actually a sans serif. It took away the extra little fancy bits. It's not quite as thick. It's got a slight style change. They aren't necessarily dramatic style changes, but you can tell that the font has changed for each character. And this is where I really want to bring in J.K. Rowling. Like I said, I don't have like the original, just the regular books to show you some of the differences. I can try and find photos to show you up here, but we're gonna start with my illustrated edition of The Sorcerer's Stone. So if you remember back, if you open up your copy, your just standard copy of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, and you go to the page where he gets the letter from Hogwarts, it's got a very specific, like, fancy font, like a fancy letter that you would get from a school. It's not just the font in italics, it's nicer looking. Like, you pull up any pictures of a Hogwarts letter and it's completely stylistically different. And this font is specifically used for letters from school throughout the series. Then think later on into books where, say, Harry gets a letter from Hagrid. Hagrid, his font has a specific personality. He's not one to use pens a lot because he's not a very scholastic character. He's more of an environmental, like, be one with the outdoors sort of character. He doesn't really care about school stuff as much. Like I said, doesn't have as much practice with a pen, so we've got a messier font. It's a little thicker. He's a very emotional person, so a lot of his letters may have teardrops. I think specifically in book 5, you could see that whoever designed that page had like integrated teardrops into the letter, so that the letter was not only his usual bolder kind of messy font, but it was also smudged, which showed more emotion from the character. And in this copy, the illustrated edition, we can see that the letter in this edition just goes on to the italics of the regular font instead of having like a specific font for the letter, which is interesting because this book has so much more detail to it as far as like illustrations and stuff that you think they would have included things like the letter font, but they didn't, which like would make this book so much fancier than it is and so much more meaningful. I think these illustrated copies, if they'd kept that font for something like the Hogwarts letter or Hagrid's personal notes. If you look at any personal note across so many characters, you have Hermione, Ron, Hagrid, McGonagall, the professional school letters, each of them have a different font, and I think many of them, if not most, were actually created specifically for the Harry Potter series. If you look at this title font, Harry Potter, how it's got the like lightning bolt under the P to kind of signify a scar, this font was created for these books. This font did not exist before these books existed. And I think that's how a lot of the font for each character letter throughout the series also went. So, I feel like I'm going to start harping on the same points, so I should probably close up this video. But hopefully this made sense to you. You kind of understand what I'm talking about with the different personalities of fonts and how that is shown. I would love if more books would do things like J.K. Rowling and Jodi Picoult, where characters show their personalities through the font, through the type that is chosen to express each of their characters, whether it's changing the letters so that they're not just italics like most books, or changing the font for each chapter depending on which character perspective we're getting. I think that would just add so much more to the reading experience, and I would love to see it more. So, let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know what kind of font videos you would like to see from me in the future. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. I will see all of you in my next video. Bye, friends.